So this is Acts chapter 20, the scripture for June 12th. At the beginning of this chapter, as Paul journeys toward Macedonia and as Paul goes toward Greece, he is a veritable all-star team of representation from cities and regions that he visited that are accompanying him. Along with Timothy, he has this the scripture isn't clear as to why they're coming with him, but perhaps it's an honor guard to keep him from being targeted by the same sort of assassination attempts he's already been targeted by. Maybe these are partners in ministry, but there's somebody from Berea, a couple folks from Thessalonica, you've got Derbe represented, and the province of Asia represented as well. And these are not like massively disparate places, but it does demonstrate how Paul has gathered together a coalition of people where his gospel message isn't dependent just on culture. This is what the gospel, I think, is designed to do. It's designed to unify in purpose all those who are from different cities and countries. Paul must truly have shown no partiality in order to get such a coalition. And I think that's an important part of Paul's message. However, as Paul prepares to return to Jerusalem, and as Paul is being commissioned by different churches and being sent back, tragedy strikes. Paul's hosting a farewell, revival-esque type meeting, and a young adult named Eutychus, probably between 24 and 40 is what the Greek word kind of gives a range of, which is older than I had thought. But he may have been a slave based on how he's talked about here in this passage, where he's called a young man and then called a boy. So I would say probably mid-20s to early 30s. Eutychus falls out of a window from the third floor. I think that it can be easy to take this passage and to chuckle about it. Even Paul puts people to sleep. Even Paul could go long in his sermons. And I think that there's some truth to that. There's some finding rapport here. But I think that even though the ending of the story is good, the moment of seeing Eutychus falling out a third-story window, that would have been etched on the hearts of everyone who was at this revival. What were the people around Eutychus doing? Why weren't they seeing that he was falling asleep? Why weren't they pulling him in? Were they so focused on what Paul was saying, which I suppose is good, but why weren't they focused on this neighbor? And how must they have been feeling when Eutychus begins to fall? The Greek word that Eutychus is based on means fortunate. There is good fortune in being made alive again, after being found dead in our trespasses and sins. There's also a charge that we have to care for those around us, to try and watch so that others don't fall to their death. If we think of Eutychus not just as a narrative, but as something that's spiritually true, we, the church, are called to keep folks from falling out the window. And how do we do that? Well, by being our brother's keeper, to use the phrase taken from the story of Cain and Abel in Genesis 4. Paul's final words to the Ephesian elders before he leaves for Jerusalem are truly final in his mind. He knows or strongly suspects that he won't see them again. And God's Spirit has prepared him for imprisonment as he goes over to Jerusalem. But he doesn't let this keep him from going to Jerusalem. His emphasis on tears in this final address is also striking. I know that for myself, I often think of Paul as sort of the intellectual giant of the early church. And I consider Paul's faith as intellectual as well, stimulating the mind. And I think that's true, in part because of his masterful use of theology and rhetoric. But we see here in Acts a passionate Paul. One who desperately wants to see the cause of Christ continue to grow, and one who has deep love for those who've invested in the cause of Christ up until now. With his last words, he directs the church, support the weak. If we aren't aligned with the marginalized, with those who are oppressed, I think that we miss Paul's heart here He could have used his last words to say justification by faith alone, which is something that is near and dear to his heart. But with his final words to the Ephesian elders, he says to advocate for the weak, to support them. I wonder, what is it about your faith that can cause you to weep? That's all for Acts chapter 20. Next week on Monday, the 15th of June, we'll be looking at Acts chapter 21. May God bless you in your reading of Scripture.